Hi, everyone. Welcome to our next session. It's hard to believe this day's going so fast. We're in session 2 of today's The Ed Collab Gathering, and I'm so happy to be here in Workshop 5 with Donalyn Miller and Travis Crowder. Their session is Expanding Adolescents' Worldview with Young Adult Literature, and this is geared for teachers of adolescence, or if you are in fact an adolescent yourself in your own heart, this is for you as well too. Donalyn Miller, as you know, she is the book whisperer. She's author of incredible books for educators to support you and your students in their reading journey. She's the author of The Book Whisperer, Reading in the Wild, co-creator of the Nerdy Book Club, the Nerdy Book Club blog. She leads Title Talk, writes for everyone under the sun, and is really a champion of reading lives for all people, not just for children, but for adults as well. Donalyn's the person that anytime you see her, she'll say, "So what are you reading?" And you'll end up getting in not only the big conversation, but you'll spend a lot of money on books or many trips to the library. So thank you, Donalyn, for inspiring us all. Donalyn's joined today by Travis Crowder. Travis has taught 7th and 8th grade English language arts for 9 years. He obtained a literature and language degree from UNC Asheville, go UNC, and a graduate degree from UNC Charlotte in 2013. Currently, he's studying gifted education at Western Carolina University, and he says in his spare time he reads voraciously and enjoys discussing books with friends, colleagues, and students, which makes so much sense of why we get to be here with you today, Travis, as well, too, as we celebrate reading with our students. So without further ado, I will pass it over to my friends, and I'll pop up your slides in just a moment.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. It's a beautiful spring day in Texas. After our gathering, I will be out in the yard doing yard work, which is also a lot of weeding and a lot of pruning of things. And so I hope you get a chance to enjoy a little sunshine today.
So right now in Taylorsville, North Carolina, it is a bit chilly. It's around 50 degrees, but later today, what I'll be doing is inviting my cousins over. We're going to do some egg dyeing in celebration of the upcoming Easter season.
And so we're excited about talking to you about our adolescents. I know we all have a love of that age group, and it's such a fascinating time in their lives. But what we're also hoping is that we can share some resources and, of course, some book recommendations that will help you expand your students' kind of worldview beyond just their own experiences. You know, we know that some of our students lead somewhat sheltered lives, and they may not be exposed to a lot of voices from outside their own communities. And so we know that literature is one of the ways that we can do that. Yes. Let's go to the next slide. Thank you, Chris. And this is just my contact information, places where you can find me. I have my website at bookwhisperer.com. I put a lot of my presentations on that SlideShare page, a lot of book lists, all the conferring forms and reader's notebook sheets I use to hold my students accountable for independent reading are there as free PDFs. I am the co-founder of the Nerdy Book Club with my friend Colby Sharp, but you know, we call it Nerdy Nation now because there's so many of us. It's like really, there are times when we think about having our own little nerdy island that we could all go live on and just read. And then, of course, I'm on Twitter at Donalyn Books.
And this is all of my information. I have a blog on teacherman2016.wordpress.com. You're welcome to check in there. I share philosophy, teaching strategies, practical applications for the classroom. And I also am a very active Twitterer, if that's even a word. I just made one up, if not. I share research that I'm reading, things that are going on in my classroom, books that I'm currently reading, and ways that you can help engender a love of reading in your students.
So what is the right word? Tweet, twit? We're not twits.
A tweeter.
A tweeter, is that it? We're the tweeters. You know, we're talking about students' access in a lot of ways today, access to information, access to stories, access to ideas, but we can't really get into that place where we're talking about intellectual and cultural access until we talk about physical access to books too. And physical access to books means two things, really. It means that students have access to books on hand that they're interested in reading and that they can read. We know that books in the home are important. The University of Nevada, Reno conducted a longitudinal study that went on for almost 20 years, over 20 countries, thousands of data points, seeking to determine the factors that relate to academic achievement, what keeps people in school longer. And what they found across all the countries that they looked in is that even over students' education, formal education that they received, even over their parents' education levels, even over socioeconomics. Books were the game changer for kids. Kids who had access to about 500 books over the course of their childhoods stayed in school 3.2 years longer than kids who did not have access to the books. Now, 500 books sounds like a lot when we're buying them all at once or finding a place to stack them in your living room, but we're talking from birth to age 18. And notice I said students had to have access to those books. I didn't say they necessarily had to read them. So access is key. I know summer's coming up and we may be asking these questions about how are we going to make sure our students have that access. Next slide, please. Thank you. This is an article that came from The Atlantic last summer called Where Books Are All But Non-Existent, looking at the plight of book deserts in rural and urban communities in the United States. You know, we want our students to live in a book flood. We want them to have books in their classrooms. We want them to have school libraries staffed by degreed librarians. We want them to have books in the home. And we want them to have meaningful access to a public library. But too many of our children, predominantly children in poverty, who are disproportionately children of color, live in what we call book deserts. They don't have meaningful access to books at their schools. They don't have meaningful access to books in their communities. And as it says here, giving kids access to books may be one of the most overlooked solutions to helping ensure kids attend school with the tools they need to succeed. Now, we can see this right here in a visual. In low-income communities, we have 1 book for every 300 children. And in upper middle income communities, it's 13 books per child. Now, I'm enjoying a beautiful spring day. Travis, unfortunately, is not. Sorry about that, Travis. Okay. It may seem, summer may seem too far off, but it is not. We need to be having this conversation in our school communities right now. How can we guarantee that all of our children have physical access to books 365 days a year?
And Donalyn,
yes, go ahead, Travis.
Speak to that for just a moment?
Yes, please do.
This infographic is probably one of the most profound things that we can show not only our teachers, but also parents as well. And I think whenever we turn information into a graphic, it takes on a much different, there's a different feel to it. And I think it makes people look at these things differently. One of the things that I've been trying to answer, one of the questions I've been trying to answer in my school this year is whenever we move into the summer break, what are some ways that we can get things or books into the hands of our students? And one of the things that we have started thinking about as a school is creating a bookmobile where we take our books by car, several of us, into different communities. And instead of encouraging the books to come into, or I'm sorry, encouraging the students to come into the school, which is difficult sometimes because of travel, students live in families where there are no funds to be able to do that. So how can we get it to them? And I think that's one of those, that's one of the answers to that question is how can we give them physical access by taking it to them?
So Bookmobile, love that idea. Book swaps. Honestly, though, I think the most successful book programs are the ones that physically put the books in the hands of kids as they're walking out the door in the summer, because I've done book swaps at a school. I'm sure you have too. We've done summer programs where we open the library 2 days a week. And while that does meet the needs of some of our families, we don't get every child. And it's often the children who need that book access the most, who, as you said, Travis, lack transportation to be able to get up to the school. Parents are working 2 jobs in the summer. Kids may be staying with grandparents, they just don't have the ability. So putting the physical books in their hands, which may mean a book donation program. It might also mean just checking out library books. That's one of the things that really, if you think about it, is kind of shocking. The key to many children's academic success lies locked inside our school buildings all summer long, unused, unread on those library shelves. So people are always worried they're going to lose some books. And I always say, I'd rather lose a book than a child,
right?
Lose a book than a reader. You're not going to lose that many books.
No, you're not. If all they're doing is sitting there over the summer, they need to be used. They were bought to be read, not to sit on a shelf all summer.
We'll pay thousands of dollars during the school year to give those children interventions because they did not read over the summer, but we're worried about losing, 5 library books that might cost $100 to replace. I mean, if we really look, we're not math teachers, but we can do math and we can do this math, right? So, I don't think it's too early for us to have this conversation about how can we guarantee all of our kids have access.
That's right.
Now, of course, once we have the physical access, access extends into this idea of intellectual and cultural access. So how are we giving kids the maximum access to different cultures, to different perspectives, to different points of view, and also to different ideas? We know that our Common Core state standards stress this. Students come to understand other perspectives and cultures. We want, through reading, through listening, our children to be able to expand their worldview, to look at different time periods, different cultures. They need to be able to evaluate other points of view critically. So it's key to not just our hope for them as citizens of the world, but also academically. The Johns Hopkins Education Department conducted, or their School of Education conducted, a fascinating study called the Worldview Literacy Project, where they really went into middle school and high school classrooms and tried to do this, to try to talk to kids about bias, about agenda, about perspective, about what it means to be in a community. And what they found was that no matter where children live or what type of school they attend, they are going to interact daily with people with different perspectives whose, I love this word, positionality, stances, their personal experiences inform their worldview. Positionality, some of us might go back to Louise Rosenblatt, where she talks about our linguistic experiential reserve. We are an accumulation of everything we've heard, everything we've read, everything we've seen, every conversation that we've had. It shapes our personal identities. It certainly shapes our reading identities. I thought we could, I know there are people participating on Twitter, so I did highlight one question and read for you. If you'd like to answer that question online, I'd love to go back and interact with you about that. But here are just some sample questions that we could use to frame a conversation with our students about this idea of exploring other cultures, exploring other perspectives. Even just going back, especially with adolescents, they are questioning so many things anyway because of their age. They're trying to find their tribe. They're trying to find the people that they can connect to, their communities. Travis, what do you think about this one with your own students? How are you launching those kinds of conversations with them?
A lot of the conversations that I have with them where we talk about, let them, I really do a lot of let them dig into themselves, let them reach within themselves to try to find who they are. A lot of that comes out in reading conferences that I have. I ask my students a lot of the time whenever I'm speaking with them, where do you see yourself at in this book? Both physically and also psychologically. Do you feel that you are a part of, where do you stand? Are you watching the action, or are you a character in the book watching everything else go on? And I think, once they begin to develop a sense of who they are and how they relate to those things, they can then begin to see how they relate to a larger community. But seeing how they've taken like the question, how can our beliefs limit us? And then how can they enliven us? I think looking at it on either side, saying, all right, how is it that the beliefs that we have, the things that we hold sacred, how are those things, how do they build us up? But how can they keep us from thinking about another culture or thinking about a different person, and also viewing them as part of our community, not trying to shut them out?
Well, I think this is also this, I agree with you, of course, about that. And I think adolescents are primed to have those conversations. What they need is someone to moderate it for them in an inclusive way, because we don't certainly want to attack anyone's belief systems. What we are asking kids to really do is push themselves to question their own beliefs, to also consider the beliefs of other people. This question, what does it mean to participate in a community? It's that communal piece. We talk sometimes about what our community is giving us, the services, the opportunities that it gives us, but we also have a responsibility to give something to the community. So when we use that word participate, how am I an active participant in my community? How am I not only getting things from the people around me and my services, my relationships, but I'm also expected to, and that involves active engagement on my part, active physical engagement, but also active intellectual engagement, empathy.
Right. And, at the core of community is togetherness. And how can we, take what we have, what we bring to the table, and what can we do to make, the community a community, but then what can we then accept? I think it's, like you said, a give and take.
Mm-hmm. Chris was like, boy, they're talking about that slide for a long time. Hi, Chris. The word diversity is certainly a word that many of us are familiar with, and we're seeing it a lot in conversations about children and young adult literature. It's long overdue for that. I did read something a little alarming this week, Travis, where they talked about the diversity trend in young adult literature. I'm like, trends go away. The diverse trends are like paranormal literature, or all of our middle schoolers are reading dystopian science fiction for years, and so diversity being a trend, it should be. That's like saying being a human being is a trend. So this idea of diversity, of course, when we talk about books, we talk about diversity in a variety of ways. We could talk about diversity of genres. We could talk about diversity of formats, but we're also looking at cultural and looking at all the aspects of diversity of our global family. If you're not familiar with We Need Diverse Books, and I imagine many of you who are participating today are familiar with We Need Diverse Books, but that's your homework if you're not familiar with it. WeNeedDiverseBooks.org is a nonprofit organization that was started almost 3 years ago by some young adult authors and illustrators to address what they see as inequities in children's publishing. In 1965, there was an article published in a mainstream newspaper titled The White World of Children's Books. In 1965, 96% of the books published for young people had white male protagonists in them, and we sadly have not advanced very far in the past 50 years. And so We Need Diverse Books is attempting to address that. Can you back up just a slide, please? On the website for We Need Diverse Books, they have book lists, they have resources. I think a lot of teachers would use more diverse titles if they knew what was available. And so We Need Diverse Books has not only the big publishers like Scholastic has participated in We Need Diverse Books from the beginning. They have their We Have Diverse Books flyers and things that go out, but also some smaller presses like Lee and Low, Cinco Puntos in El Paso, which only publishes diverse titles. They also publish a lot of those titles in paperback, which is for the first time, which I think is nice. It's more affordable for families, more affordable for teachers. They also have a video campaign or a photo campaign. Here's author Grace Lynn talking about the need for diverse books. I love what she says here. We need diverse books so that someday all good multicultural stories can just be called good stories. If you're on social media, they use the WNDB hashtag on Instagram, on Twitter. They also have a Facebook page. If you're a Tumblr person, I love following their Tumblr because they often share book resources that are thematic or topical. So, for example, this spring they've had a lot on the Tumblr about books about immigrants, about books about Muslims, books for Black History Month, books about women, and so a nice way to find those resources. I share that statistic with you, 1965, 96% of the books published for children not featuring white male protagonists. You can see here that original statistic failed to take into account the percentage of books that we know are published for children every year that do not have human characters or humanoid characters in them. They have talking trucks, talking trees, talking rabbits. But you can see here the breakdown. Still 73.3% white, 7.6% African American, 3.3% Asian Pacific or Asian Pacific Islander or Americans, 2.4% Latinx. If you're not familiar with the term Latinx, it's a way to shortcut in print. It's a more inclusive term than Latino, Latina. It's not a real word, it's a made up word, but if you've seen it in a newspaper article or in a webinar, then now you know what it means. And then 0.9% American Indian First Nation. That number has actually gone down. A couple of years ago, it was 1.1%, recognizing that even a 1/10 of a percentage point here represents hundreds of books. So we still have a long way to go. And there's also a current conversation going on social media and in blogs about the fact that even with all the books that are being published that are diverse, many of them are still being written by white people. So only 25% of the books published last year that had African-American protagonists in them were written by African-American authors. And this is only looking at racial diversity. This doesn't go into other aspects of diversity, different religions, different sexual orientations, a spectrum of gender identities, physical and mental disabilities. So gender, I already mentioned gender, but it's only looking at just that one piece of it. So we have a long way to go.
We do.
Travis, I know we had a conversation about this not too long ago. I hear people say mirrors and windows all the time, but they often don't know the sliding glass doors part. And of course, this metaphor that Reading Sims Bishop coined in 1990, mirrors, windows, and books can be mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. I actually found the exact quote where she mentioned those terms. So I think a lot of people know the metaphor, but they haven't seen her actual words. So I was so happy to find it. And here's what she said. Books are sometimes windows, offering views of worlds that may be real or imagined, familiar or strange. These windows are also sliding glass doors, and readers have only to walk through an imagination to become part of whatever world has been created or recreated by the author. When lighting conditions are just right, however, a window can also be a mirror.
We have at my school, my dear friend, Christy Jules-Rude. We have worked together for quite a few years, and she started at the beginning of this year having her students, whenever they felt that a book was a window for them, it was a door, or it was a mirror, she would ask them to write up something to kind of explain what it was about that book, what qualities made it so powerful for you. Where did you see yourself in this? Where did it reflect you? Could you get out and walk around in the world a bit? And I took that from her and started using that with students. And what I started asking my students was, I want you to walk over to my bookshelf and I want you to tell me where you see yourself. And that was an enlightening conversation.
Because what if they can't?
Right. And they were honest with me about that. Right. Yeah, because,
that seems powerful.
Yeah. And so whenever I would have a student walk over there, I would have some who would say, well, I really like this one. And I was like, no, that's not what I'm asking you. Where do you see yourself represented in my bookshelf? And that was, time for me to go to Amazon. That was time for me to go to the bookstore and say, okay, I've got to represent this kid in my bookshelf.
Well, I know you do. A lot of us do identity maps with our kids, or we having them make them in their writer's notebooks. Zada Ahmed talks about this so wonderfully, but having kids just write down all the ways that they see themselves, kind of that who I am. And I know you're going to share a little bit of that in just a moment. But and also which piece of their identities do they see themselves in those books? Because it could be something, very obvious in that, the main character has younger siblings and I do too. It could be something more nuanced than that. They're the character traits that they might share in common. So it sounds like you could really encourage kids to go deeper into that activity.
Absolutely. All right. So for this part of our presentation, we wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about mentor text. Whenever we think about reading in the English language arts classroom, independent reading is one of the first things that comes to my mind. But as teachers, we're also responsible to help provide students with rich mentor texts. We can help to build some of their identity, or help them see some of their identity through the mentor text that we give them. So if you'll go to the next slide, please. Two of the texts that I use at the very beginning of the year, I used a section called My Name from The House on Mango Street, and then a poem from Kwame Alexander's phenomenal book, The Crossover. And just as a quick aside, for non-readers who are very uncertain about if books are for them, if they're not certain if they can actually make it through a book, they've never read a book cover to cover, I have never had anything or anyone return this book to me and say, this one isn't for me. Boys, girls, everyone loves this book. So whenever I start off the year, I give them the section from The House on Mango Street entitled My Name, for them to read about Sandra Cisneros' experience with a name. But then also in The Crossover, we look at first, which is where the main character, Josh, begins talking about his experience with his name and how at first he didn't like it, but he grew to love it. And Sandra Cisneros' take is a little bit different, wanting to grow a different understanding of her name from what had been grown by people before her, women before her, and just kind of let students begin to see, how do different people view their names? Are they in ways self-fulfilling prophecies, or are they things that, you can make the name your own? And I then guide them in some writing where they can turn it into a poem. They can write, as an essay type, exploring what their relationship is with their own name.
Now, I know you are a big you use picture books in your classroom, and I use them in my middle school classroom too. And a book I would probably throw in here too, of course, that old beloved classic Chrysanthemum by Kevin Henkes. We could certainly bring out Chrysanthemum and talk about that story. With a name like Donalyn, I've never had any struggles with my name at all.
Well,
you should have seen the Starbucks cup I got yesterday where they just gave up at the end of my name and just scribbled something that sort of looked like letters of the alphabet. They just gave up.
Well, I'll tell you this very quickly because I think it's funny. My first name is Stephen, spelled with a PH, Stephen. And every year in school, I had to tell my teachers I go by my middle name, Travis, not by Stephen. But when I graduated from Mitchell Community College, they called my name out. For some reason, they looked at the Stephen and called me Stephanie.
Oh, we know how important it is to get students' names right. I'm so glad that you shared this.
Absolutely. So one of the reasons I use mentor texts with my students is to help them, understand what their name means. I want them to, build that understanding themselves and talk about it, write about something that's meaningful to them. But whenever we share this with our class, or whenever we, go around and I'll let them share the things that they've written, I want them to begin developing respect for the names of other students in the classroom. Some of my students have names that have been passed down through families, like everyone does. Some of them are new and very original, but that belongs to those students. And I think this is a great thing for teachers, or any educator. The article, The Lasting Impact of Mispronouncing Students' Names, which was in NEA Today last September, shows that mispronouncing students' names shows a disregard for the student and for their culture. And if we don't know the stories behind our students' names, and even further than that, if we don't even know how to pronounce them, we're showing our students that part of you doesn't matter. And I was reading an article where this one teacher one writer had called it a tiny act of bigotry. How profound is that? That whenever we're talking with our students, we don't even know how to pronounce their names. That, to me, that's just showing them you don't matter, even though we may not say it.
Have you had students, and I know I have, middle schoolers who've just given up on any teacher ever pronouncing their name correctly, so they give themselves anglicized nicknames?
Yes, right.
My name is Joe or something, and you're looking at their name on the roll and going, no, baby, that's not your name. And basically the kids would rather just be called Joe than listen to their name be butchered. And I've told them, no, that is your name, and you know my name, and I should learn how to pronounce theirs. But I think kids who've had that happen to them all through school have just kind of adopted nicknames. Has that happened to you before?
Absolutely. I have a student this year who just prefers to be called by what I would say the American pronunciation of his name, as opposed to the Mexican pronunciation of his name, because it's been butchered to death. And I hear teachers often say, and I'm not here to say insult anyone, but when I hear teachers say, well, I just can't learn that name, I want to say, well, the students learned your name. You should take the time to learn that student's name.
You're right. That little tiny act is important.
The next thing that I go into a little bit after we talk about names and we get some final drafts done, I look at where I'm from poetry. This is an idea I picked up from Penny Kittle, looking at how, I write a poem for them and I talk about where I'm from, the things that make me who I am, community, the type of house I lived in. I was raised very poor, so, I feel like I have that connection I can make with my students. And then we flip over and we look at the poem Theme for English B by the inimitable Langston Hughes. And we talk about how culturally where he is from changes the entire idea, the entire tone of his poem. And then I let them experiment with writing their own Where I'm From poem. But then we look at Theme for English B and look at it as autobiographical writing and play around with some of the language that he has. And talking about identity webs, I have my students do one of those each year, and we kind of tie elements. I'll tell them, look back at your identity web. What have you put in there? What could you pull from that to add into this poem? And it's a great conversation. Putting chart paper up around your room, having students go around and like write, a snippet of their poem, or something that they think about, where they're from, and letting everyone see that our classroom, like your or like the quote, the positionality that we have, let them see that that is different regardless of the community that they're in.
I've taught social studies for many years. Also in 6th grade, social studies in Texas is world cultures. And so we're teaching the elements of culture at the beginning of the year in the broad possible sense. So family, faith, things like art and architecture, games, sports, and language. And so having kids brainstorm their personal cultures and use those in their Where I'm From poems, I think dovetails nicely with the conversations that we're having about, yes, this is my culture, but everyone has a culture and we can respect each other's cultures. There's things that we have in common here in our poems or in our identity webs. We also have things that make us different. And that's one of the wonderful things about being a human being, is that every one of us can have these connections and also these things that are unique to us.
Right. One of the final things that I'll mention about mentor texts, if anyone would like extra ideas or anything, I'd be more than happy to give those. But how do I want to frame this? Writing from pictures is very powerful. I have worked with both 7th and 8th grade students. I've worked with high school students before, and I've never met a child, young adult, who did not have something that he or she could say about a picture, something about photography. And this won the Pulitzer for coverage of the refugee crisis. This picture was taken on November 16th of 2015. And the chilling thing behind this is that after the boat owner went back, he was arrested. And I tell students that after we've had a conversation about this, but I feel that this gives them a perspective. It makes them think differently. Whenever we hear the word refugee, in some places that has taken on a bad name, that has taken on, a negative connotation. But these refugees, in some ways, I think that mitigates who they are. These aren't just a group of people who are just trying to get somewhere. These are human beings, and they each have value. And how does this picture show that?
We talk a lot about the pull factors in immigration, what brings someone to another country. We talk about the American dream and democracy and citizenship, but there's also those push factors in immigration too. What forces someone to leave a country that is their homeland? It's not always because they have a job overseas. It's often because they're fleeing for their lives. They live in these war-torn countries where they are worried that they and their children will not survive if they don't flee. They would probably prefer to stay safely in their home countries with their families. And so that's a conversation to have with kids too. It's not just about that shiny beacon on the hill that they're moving towards. It's also something very frightening and terrifying that they are fleeing from.
Right.
We've talked a little bit about those diverse stories and books that are published here in America and the statistics about that. But another way that we can expand students' worldview is through translations. I think about there are many great books being published around the world for young people, but they're underrepresented in the books our children here in America see. And so I wanted to share a few resources so teachers could kind of build up their knowledge. Leonard Marcus, who's a legend in the children's literature world, he's a scholar of the history of children's literature. He says, when he's talking about translations, he says, the goal should be to make books from elsewhere seem less about foreignness and more about the adventure of seeking experiences beyond the bounds of the part of the world that we already know. So not just reading about France, but reading a book that was written in France for French young people, and then reading a translation of that book. And so that can also expand students' worldview into voices. It's not just someone researching that voice, but that actual voice sharing their own story. So if you're not familiar with the United States Board on Books for Young People, it's the division of the International Board on Books for Young People, which specifically shares U.S. translations of books published in other countries. They give out awards every year. They have some fantastic lists and resources. So if you're just looking for more translations, I've used this site a lot because they are looking at it through the lens of what makes an exemplary text. Just because a book has been published in English doesn't necessarily mean it's a great translation of that story. So there's some scholarship behind these lists, which I appreciate because I don't feel like I have the knowledge to evaluate some of these texts on my own. And so I trust USBBY to do it. Also, every year in the body of the awards that the American Library Association gives out for exemplary children's and young adult literature every year, there's also the Batchelder Award, which is given out every year for the best translations. And so that's also another nice list to see some high quality exemplary texts that have been translated from other languages, from books published in other countries. So Travis, we're down to the end of our talking points, which means it's time for us to share a few book recommendations until we run out of time. Travis, I think we have 20 books and we have, what, 8 minutes? Oh, Chris is laughing at us. So we have one sentence per book, or maybe two. Yes, there are slides for those. Okay, there we go.
Oh, how can you say this in one sentence?
If we really only got to one book, could it be this one?
Oh, Lord. Okay, well, what I will say about this one is if you care anything about the racial disparity that's going on in our nation or is worldwide, but more so in the United States, pick up this book and read it. The main character is enthralling, but also it's just a very incisive book worth reading.
The Hate U Give is based on the Black Lives Matter movement. Angie Thomas, this is her debut book. It's #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. It's already being translated. They're talking about a movie. If you don't read much YA, this is one you absolutely have to read this year, not just for its significance in the publishing world as a publishing phenom, but because the story is powerful. I honestly believe, Travis, that every teenager and every adult needs to read this book. It's powerful about a young girl who witnesses a friend being shot by a police officer, and she's the only witness, and what happens after that. It's just powerful. The writing is outstanding. I really got connected to the characters.
This is Exit Pursued by a Bear by E.K. Johnston. E.K. Johnston is a Canadian writer, and in this novel, the main character, Hermione, is off at cheer camp, and one night someone slips something into her beverage, and she wakes up the next morning realizing that she has been the subject of a date rape. So the rest of the book is her journey and some very critical decisions she has to make. I've given this to students to read. I have to be very selective about that because this is a book that could create a lot of controversy. But I think it's one of those where students need to see this is a conversation that is being had and how are people dealing with it.
E.K. Johnston is a fantasy author. She wrote The Story of Owen, which was a great fantasy read. And she said, because the way that this book plays out, this young woman is date raped, and everyone in her life acts exactly the way we wished they would. Her parents, the medical professionals that meet with her, her classmates, even her jerky boyfriend finally comes around, the police, everyone. And she said, of all the books I've written books with dragons in them, and this book is the most fantastical book I have ever written. Because that's not how it usually plays out sadly, for young women and men who are assaulted.
Yeah, that's right. And Donalyn, I did say that right. She is Canadian.
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay, all right. This is Because I'm Furniture by Talia Chaltis. In this book, Anka, the main character, this is a book written in verse, and my students, once again, they are finding that they have a love of poetry. Anka is a very quiet, treated like furniture, hence the title, Her father is very abusive, but she takes a liking to volleyball and is quite an adept athlete, which playing on the team, working with her coach, gives her the courage finally to stand up to her father. But the consequences are, let's just say, it'll take your breath away. Great book. This one is A Girl Named Mister by Nikki Grimes, another book written in poetry. Mary Rudine is the name of the main character, and her initials are MR, hence Mister. And she finds herself in a precarious situation with her boyfriend, but juxtaposed with the story, the narrative of Mary Rudine is a story of Mary, the mother of Jesus. And Nikki Grimes parallels those stories beautifully, weaving together a narrative that helps you see one side of the story of a pregnancy in one character, but also while showing you some of the struggles of Mary, mother of Jesus's pregnancy. This is La Linea by Anne Jaramillo, purchased at the request of one of my Hispanic students. This is a story that takes place in a small Mexican town and is a story of immigration. They get on a train headed for the United States, and the train is loosely translated people killer, if I'm not mistaken. And it's one action sequence right after another, but it opened up a lot of questions and conversations about immigration in my classroom. This has been one of my favorites this year. Trevor Noah's Born a Crime. Trevor Noah and I are the same age, but one thing that I will say is growing up, I never heard a word about apartheid, which is a lot where he tells his stories from South Africa as he was growing up and the things that he went through with his mother, both of them very poor, and having to learn how to deal with a world where life was not always respected by everyone.
He talks about being mixed race in Africa and what that means, because they had Black communities, they had the white communities, then they had mixed race people who were not supposed to exist, because that's where the title comes from. He was his mother's pregnancy and his birth actually illegal crimes. But I listened to the audio of this, and Trevor Noah narrates the audio, and it's fantastic.
This is We Are the Ants by Sean Hutchinson. This is a book that actually picked up some popularity in my classroom. The main character, Henry, experiences being abducted by aliens and wakes up in very different places, but they give him an ultimatum telling him that in 144 days the world will end unless he presses this very cliche red button. So there's some struggles going in through this with his mother, his grandmother, who is dealing with Alzheimer's, but also he is dealing with the death of his boyfriend who committed suicide the year before.
Well, we're almost out of time, so we just have time for one more book.
Can we go to one of yours, Donalyn?
No. I've read all of these too. So
all right,
can we just click through for a couple? And yeah, I want to see. Let's keep going. Okay. Wait, let's stop right here. Okay, if we're only going to end with one book, I want to share this one. It's Flying Lessons and Other Stories. It's a collection of short stories that's been edited by Ellen O, who's the co-founder of We Need Diverse Books. It features multiple voices. So, and Saman Chanani, Tim Federle, Grace Lynn, Walter Dean Myers has a short story in it. Jackie Woodson, different voices. All of the stories have different perspectives. Some of them are humorous. Some of them are more dramatic in tone. I think as a teacher, I would probably pick one story to share out loud with kids and then open up the book for independent reading. But what I love is that so many voices are represented in just this one volume. It would make a fantastic middle school read aloud. Now, we're at the end of our time, and that just went by so blazingly fast, Travis.
It did. We were worried.
Thank everyone for participating.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you both. As always, you're leading us to purchase more books if we don't already have them. But also, I mean, I loved. I think I chatted to you earlier. So much of what you're saying is so incredibly powerful. I love the point, and it's something I have not thought about before, of using translations as well. I need to add that into my reading life and the life that I share with students as well too. Just really powerful, and also, as you said, how chilling and problematic it is that not only is there such a small percentage of books that aren't written about either white characters or animals, but also the phenomenon of publishers creating possibly more diverse characters, but not written by folks that actually live the life of those characters. So the fact that The Hate U Give is a national bestseller, it's amazing that it's a phenomenon, and let's hope that it stops being a phenomenon, and it just is the way that publishing is.
Exactly.
So thank you both for your book recommendations, for your inspiration. It's a pleasure to have you both here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chris.
Yes,
thank you, Travis.
Thank you, Donalyn.
And for those of you that are continuing with us into the next session, wow, it's hard to believe that we've really zipped through this day so quickly. We are now, oops, where do we go here? There we go. We are now moving into session 3 that starts at the top of the hour. We have 3 options to choose from. I will be joined by our EdCollab social media advocates. 3 of them are here with us today. One can't join us, but helped to be a big part of this project. In this workshop, we will share we're very excited about a project we're calling the Global Kind Project that will begin in May of this year. And we'll talk all about the ways that you can study along with the resources that we've put together and connect with classrooms around the world to study themes around kindness, empathy, action. So we're excited for that session. Also during this time, we have another special guest, Ruth Ayers, that is joining us. This will be a session for grades K through 12. Ruth is doing a session on moves to make for enticing hard-to-reach writers. This also, just so you know, is some brand new work that Ruth will be coming out with shortly. Yay, she has another book coming. So that'll be a totally amazing session from an incredible writer, educator, reader. You will love it. Then we also are joined by guest Tanji Reed-Marshall, who is leading a session for secondary teachers and called An Invitation to Examine, Critique, and Engage Critical Media Literacies in the Age of Common Core Standards. And so we look forward to having you join us for one of these sessions in session 3. And then do not forget, if you are inspired like you were by this session or by any other session today, please go to our website, click on charities, and there you'll see 3 charities, each one selected personally by our morning keynote authors. And it includes a description of why that particular charity speaks to them, the personal connections that they have with it. If you loved something today, if you feel inspired as I was during this session, consider paying forward to any one of those charities or any charity at all. A cup of coffee, what you pay for a cup of coffee, what you might pay for a registration or a hotel, or whatever you're able to give will help to pay today's joy forward to those that are supporting our communities, our kids, and families. So thank you both to our special guest. Enjoy the rest of your gathering, everyone, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.